And may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're in the 14th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 14. That should be pretty easy to remember. 14, part 2, 14. All right, and the date was 12/13/14. That's another easy one to remember. So that could be found on page 173 of this 14th book of Israel, part 2. And the title of the sermon that our overseer gave was called, Man's Ways of Torture Are Not Working. Yahweh offers the only answer. And that's very, very important to remember. You know, it's very important to remember that Yahweh does offer the only answer. You know, because sometimes we do get tempted to follow this way of revenge, this way of torture that we've been taught in the world. And, you know, we have to put our full trust in Yahweh and know and understand that Yahweh is the only one who really has the answers. None of these things that they've been doing and trying all this time has ever worked. And in verse 2, you know, Pastor was talking about, I remember him mentioning this, but this was back when Dick Cheney, the former vice president, had come out and was you know, taking a stand for torture and saying, you know, well, what are we supposed to do? You know, kiss them on the cheek? You know, kind of snive like, get real, you know, torture's the only way. Torture's never worked, though. It's never worked. And, you know, Pastor says, well, you know, Dick Cheney, since you asked the question, I'm going to answer it for you. I'm going to answer it to you. And in verse 3, he says, when you get a prisoner, make him useful to the United States. Bring him to the House of Yahweh and let us teach him the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. We can make a useful member out of him, and you could send him back to his country. Praise Yahweh. Yes, that's justice. That's, I would say, true justice, example number 1. Teach, not torture. Teach, not torture. You know, he says in verse 4 that this is the most evil thing in the world, you know, and this torture. And if you go back and you trace its history, you know, you see that city that sits on 7 hills, you know, they full of tortures. That was something that they really enjoyed. But this is very far from Yahweh's way. Yahweh has nothing to do with that. In verse 5, he says, now here, biblical instructions. This is one of his news releases that he was being released. Biblical instructions work better than all pharmaceuticals. Here's another example of justice. Justice number 2. The scriptures are more powerful in preventing sickness and disease when they're obeyed than all the pharmaceuticals. And of course, these articles bring forth the proof that shows this. But you could look, you know, you could easily just look at what's going on in the world and look into see, has these pharmaceuticals, have they really brought health to people? You know, people who have to take 15 different medications every day just to exist. You know, is that health? Is that a healthy lifestyle? Well, you know, the scriptures show how all these things could have been avoided, that they're trying desperately to get rid of or to at least hide the symptoms or to give relief from. In verse 6, he says, now this article, I don't know if you saw the ad or not. He said, I hope you did on the prophetic word, but our group made me one, and I think it was the men who made a news article showing that Yisrayl Hawkins is going to be a household name. And it's going to be seen here and there everywhere as they showed it in Times Square. Times Square. He said, you know, the big television. And then, you know, he gives, you see the picture in the book right there on Times Square. See that? Praise Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Remember that in the open square, you know, right there. You know, Yahweh really you could see the inspiration in the work in the House of Yahweh in these last days. You see it everywhere. And but he says it's that huge television screen. Now, it's a Times Square, and that one that's gone over, it's gone to over 70 million people. So over 70 million people. That's a lot of people. It's a small dent, you might say, compared to what the other side has been doing. But really think about that: 70 million people. You would have never been able to do this prior to this time period with the helps of the internet and all these things. So in verse 7 he says, now this week, the article that it was being released, it says, this week, here's what the Bible really says about eating pork. Eating pork, remember that. And then we'll go to verse 11, just like Leviticus 11. But this is verse 11. And he said, he also said, now, he's been talking, he's been hearing this. He said, pork. And he goes into the article in France, which, if you remember this, they made it mandatory for the school lunches to have pork in them. Now think about that. I mean, that is like showing absolutely no respect for the people's desire to avoid this thing. And this is what Pastor says in that same verse 11. He says they either had to eat pork, either that, but basically, showing that was being forced on him. And he said, you're probably going to see more of this as we get closer to the end because of the great showdown that's taking place right now. And it's wonderful. But of course, listen to what he's saying. You're probably going to see more of this as we get towards the end. And of course, it's this forced evil upon the people that he's talking about. Scriptures talk about this very thing with the mark of the beast, that they're forced into accepting this mark. This is all leading up to this big showdown, because this evil beast does not like to not get its way. But, it is very, very short-lived, very short-lived. But these things are going to take place, and they're going to continue to grow as we see this showdown coming to a head. Now in verse 13 he says, now here we're talking about fulfilled prophecy. Get that? He said, if you're too stupid to get this, if you're too stupid or dumb to listen, at least listen to what I'm saying. Please listen to what he's saying here. He said, the prophet said that knowledge would be increased in the last days. And we've gone over this many times in the House of Yahweh, but when was this knowledge actually increased? When was this transition? It was the same year, the very year that our overseer was born, in 1934. This was when all these things started to really take off. Now, he calls this the last generation, given to rebellious man, and he shows nuclear bombs that will darken the sun. And Daniel said it will be in the end. Now, notice that. It will be in the end. So knowledge will be increased, and there will be the worst time of trouble ever, showing the same thing that the Savior said in Matthew 24. Now, isn't that something? Isn't that something? Pastor says, try to predict what you'll do tomorrow. Even when nothing huge unexpectedly takes place, when you try to plan from one day to the next, you say, tomorrow I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and we're going to need to get this done, and then really evaluate how well things took place according to your plan. You'll see we're very far from having that complete control like Yahweh does. But Yahweh's plan comes to pass perfectly. It comes to pass perfectly. And, that's what he says in verse 16, that these prophecies are true and they're coming to pass in detail. In detail. You know, I get really excited when I think about this, and you know, I can hardly wait to really get more into these prophecies with like these 10 kings, because this is a huge deal. You know, this is a very huge deal that has taken place, and we saw it come to pass in those fine details. Yeah, praise Yahweh. Just like Yahweh said we would, you know. And this is what pastors are always trying to get us to see. Look, this is coming to pass exactly how Yahweh predicted it. You don't have anything to fear. You don't have anything to doubt. You know, Yahweh is doing this. But of course, the world, they try to get people sidetracked using very powerful emotional situations. You know, if people are stirred by their emotions, you can easily manipulate them. And if you look back at over the course of history, you'll see that all wars, all major wars, are started with these big emotional events. And of course, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 200 years later, a lot of times you find out that they were not real events, that they were staged events. Okay, so, you know, I say those types of things because it's important that you don't get caught up in the deception. You know, because the deception is thick in this world. And part of that deception is causing people to rely on their emotions and not rely on what Yahweh tells them. You know, and of course these big emotional events, it's very easy to manipulate people during those types of things. Well, not so with Yahweh's people. Why? Because Yahweh's people we don't go to the world to find our answers or to get our direction. We come straight to Yahweh, who's given us the blueprint already. You know, we've been studying today's events for 40 years in the House of Yahweh. You know, how long has Pastor been bringing the events that we're seeing today in the world? You know, so why would we get confused and think, you know, well, maybe I need to, you know, maybe they got this right in the world. Maybe, you know, they want to cast doubt. But once you're fully trained in these prophecies, you know, once you fully understand them, you'll know, you know, you can't fall for that. It's just, you couldn't convince yourself to fall for it, you know. But the deception is very, very great in this world. And that's why Yeshua warned, you know, be on guard. Be on guard. Be careful. Like the scripture says, guard your mind with all diligence. Be careful where you're getting your information from. Be careful what you're accepting to be true and what's not true. Because if it doesn't come from here, it's susceptible to be a lie. You know, it could very well be a lie. And you don't want to have these ideas, these lies built up in your mind, because they will add the confusion that will lead you to becoming deceived. So remember that. In the middle of verse 16 here, he says, no man, no human could do that. Only Yahweh can do it. And in fact, that's the job of the two witnesses that's shown in Isaiah 45. He chose two men so that they may know, the people may know, from the rising of the sun and to the setting of the same, that there's no power except Yahweh. You get that? How would that even be possible without the use of modern technology? You know, even the Noras, and when you go out and you gossip, and yes, word travels fast. How could you possibly get it all around the world in one generation without the use of this modern technology? You know, we couldn't do it. So obviously this, again, it lends more credibility to what Yahweh is saying here. And if you turn to God, you cut yourself off from Him and you have no help. Now, we'll turn to verse 17 on page 176. But he says, well, here in Micaiah 4:1, he says, but in the last days it will come to pass that the mountain, the promotion of the house of Yahweh, will be established. Now, if you know anything about history, you know that the house of Yahweh was destroyed around 70 A Y. A Y. There was no house of Yahweh. Now the disciples were all murdered and their buildings covered up with a mosque or something, or an orphanage maybe, where they killed babies, after abusing them. All the things, but he says the evil that went on in those 1,500 years before the Bible was brought back. The evil, and we've gone over that history a lot in the House of Yahweh, but this is actually, this 1,500 years is talking about the time period where scriptures were not, even in their renditions, that they have in the world, they were not available to people. You couldn't just get a Bible. You just had to take the preacher's word for it, and he was speaking Latin. You didn't even understand. So, but the evil that went on during this time period when the scriptures were taken away. Now, think about that, because that's what they're trying to do today. They're trying to take the scriptures away. They're trying to push the scriptures aside and reunite, you remember the history there in the 1,500 years where you had the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation and all these wars and fighting back between different groups and such. And of course, now, 500 years after Martin Luther nailed up his 95 thesis there in Germany, you have the Pope going to I believe it's Sweden on that 500-year anniversary, which is scheduled for next year to, kind of celebrate this. But there's really no Protestant anymore because they're not protesting anything. But remember that this time period to bring about the work in these last days, these things took place. And none of these people were the House of Yahweh by any means, but they did fight and work their whole life to make sure that the scriptures can be at least available for the people, because that time period when it was not, you saw some of the most evil torture go on that's ever been recorded. So that in itself ought to tell you something. When this is taken away from people, they don't do better. They do much, much worse. And that's what Pastor's trying to get us to see. In verse 19, he says, well, now get this. Solomon built a house of Yahweh in Jerusalem. And in 1 Kings 3, maybe we ought to turn there and just read it, but in 1 Kings 3, he gives you the history of the house of Yahweh. He gives you the history of the Catholic Church too, and running abreast with the evil movement that follows God's and trusts in God's and God worship. So we have all that history, before us. We have it all recorded for us in the great book of Yahweh. In verse 23, just to back up just before that, he's going into the prophet Micaiah's work and showing, from that establishment of the house of Yahweh there in King Solomon's time. That was in 1013. And then here we have Micaiah prophesying around in between the years 717 and 710. He says, well, therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Now, Zion is where Solomon put the temple of Yahweh. And of course, we know Zion has a meaning that is apart from that. But we're talking about the physical location of the building that was called the House of Yahweh. Okay? And it was the work of Yahweh. But Zion is where Solomon put the temple of Yahweh. They called it the temple, and it was actually the house of Yahweh, as you just read in 1 Kings. Well, why was it called the temple later? Why would they do that? Remember they said what they told Samuel. We want to have kings. We want to be just like all the other nations. All the other nations go to temples. They have temples everywhere, right? Let's just do away with this whole Yahweh thing. We'll just call it the temple. Well, because the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians took the name from the people, and they would not allow it to be pronounced. Remember this forced iniquity, that they would just take it away. Just like we saw in this article talking about the Muslim children there in France who had to go to school with no option of what they can eat. No, you have to eat pork here, That's the love, that's the care and concern that we see in the world. Well, it doesn't seem to be working out too well there in France. In verse 23, therefore, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Let's see. In verse 24, in verse 12, he says, therefore, this was about 303 years after Solomon built the house of Yahweh. Micaiah made this prophecy and said, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become heaps of rubble, and the mountain of the house of Yahweh like the high places in the forest, which he's saying is bare, nothing there. Now that's the prophecy of Micaiah that we see 303 years after the house of Yahweh was built. In Matthew, the Savior doing the speaking here, in Matthew 21, says to keep those two events in mind. Keep those two events in mind, the Savior doing the speaking. That is, 1 Kings, the house of Yahweh was built, and the year it was built was approximately 1013. But Micaiah, around 710 AY, no, that would be BY, had made this prophecy that Zion would be plowed like a field. And here's a big, beautiful temple, the most beautiful thing in Israel, strong, with huge wall around it. Think about that. You look at some of our tall structures here in the United States, some of our most secure places, and think and here he was speaking, Yeshua was speaking, and knowing what was going to take place, knowing that from prophecy. Well, we know a lot of these strongholds in the world are going to suffer the same thing in these last days. We know that just like Yeshua knew it. We know it from prophecy because Yahweh has foretold these things in advance. Verse 26, he says, and then the Savior says here in Matthew 21, notice verse 43, therefore I say to you, the kingdom of Yahweh will be taken from you, it'll be taken from you, and given to a people of the same habit, but from a foreign land. Now, the kingdom of Yahweh, that's what was given to Solomon. And he built a house for Yahweh. But the Savior says now, it's going to be taken away from you and given to another people of a foreign land. And they will bring forth the fruits of it. He just got through telling these people, you're not bringing forth the fruits of Yahweh. Okay? So, we remember that. Remember that analogy of the tree there, and that the house of Yahweh is this great tree that will bring forth the fruits. And that's what was told to us. We need to bring forth fruits befitting repentance. It's not enough just to say, I'm sorry I did it. We have to show it also with our actions. Yahweh requires that of us. We have to be making a constant effort. And that is this time period that Yahweh's given us at. That's where we're at. But very shortly now, that time will be up. That time will be up. And you'll really, really look back and hate the fact that you wasted any minute of any day if we don't take advantage of this time that Yahweh's given us. Because, praise Yahweh. Brethren, like the prophet said, though it seems slow, wait for it. I guarantee you, after the fact, it will not seem slow. It will seem like it just went by. Like, I just started. What do you mean I'm ready? I just got started. You could think back of anything in your life. I remember being in school and things and thinking, Is this day ever going to get over, you know? Yeah, well, now you look back and you say, wow, they went really quick. Those days went quick. Well, this is exactly, you know, what the prophets are saying there. You know, though it seems slow maybe right at any particular moment, you know, they will surely come to pass. And we ought to be able to see that. We ought to really, really be able to see that right now, because Yahweh has seen it through, that every single one of his prophecies, not one of them has been neglected. Praise Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. And we here at the House of Yahweh have had the privilege, the unique privilege, to see it step by step. You know, because the world is still in darkness. Even if they understand certain things, you know, it's only a few things. Here we are given complete understanding from our overseer. Praise Yahweh. So, with that, I'm going to ask if everybody would please stand. I'd like to turn these services over to an awesome priest in the House of Yahweh, the great Kohan David Hawkins.
Praise Yahweh. You may be seated. So we're going to continue on from verse 39. Let me ask you a question. How is Yahweh going to be selecting you? How is, you know, many are called, but few are chosen. How, what's the criteria for the selection? It says there in verse 39, that's how Yahweh is going to select you. And notice what he says here. You who love righteousness, you who follow righteousness, will be selected to guide the universe forever. So, we are to love righteousness, right, and follow righteousness, and have the desire, and that's why we have the desire to come to the house of Yahweh, because we want to fellowship with other people of like minds, right? And in fact, it's a little bit even more than that. It's a family that we are a part of, okay? And this is important. You know, we know flesh and blood is so much, okay? Without character, without righteousness, all right? Brothers and sisters, do like what Cain and Abel did, okay? What Cain did to Abel, all right? We see that in the news all the time. So it's not really anything. It's much greater, much better, right, when we have a family here and we're striving, we're living according to Yahweh's righteousness, and peace is the result of that. So it continues to say here, that's the reason we were created and put here on the earth. Mankind simply lost his direction, lost the reason that he was even here. And, you know, that's another thing. They don't want you to even think about a purpose, right? That's why academia is based on the lie that Pastor is going to be talking about here. Mankind simply lost his direction. He lost the reason that he was even here. He didn't even know why he was here. He thought he just evolved from a tadpole. And when you think about this teaching is supposedly coming from the schools of higher learning. Okay? And it violates a basic scientific law. Okay? That you can't just have something occur like that without nothing. Okay? Causing it. You see? So it violates a basic law. And it is ridiculous and stupid on its face. And the way they have it set up in these universities, okay, a professor cannot really advocate something other than evolution. Okay? They don't want to bother with the facts. And you will find yourself, although they have something called tenure in these colleges, they'll find a way of getting rid of you. Okay? If you buck that system. And it's just, you should see, brethren, if you think about it, if you just think about it with some common sense, that evolution is false. It is ridiculous on its face. It went on to say here, the tadpole, well, he came from a gassy god, and of course, Pastor is making fun of this, you know, who blew up, you know, God who blew up, a big bang, you know. That's the best they could come up with, all right? And if you look and understand what's going on in the world, they do similar things. They even with the homosexuality thing, it's ridiculous on its face, and they're pushing it. You see, it doesn't make sense, not even to the animals, right? It doesn't make sense, but they're pushing it and trying to make people who oppose it seem as if they are old-fashioned or they are not really civilized. Okay? And this is what you have to really consider. Continuing here, it says, let's go to verse 40. Is not Yahweh among us? And of course, they want to give the impression that they are, at least the Catholic Church is relying on some higher authority. Why can't I rule instead of Yisrayl Hawkins? Why do we, listen to this point here, why do we have to ask the House of Yahweh? Why do we have to ask the House of Yahweh? Why do we have to go to Abel? I mean, you know, you should have that answer clearly in your head. Okay? Why do we have to ask at Abel? Why? Well, try asking the Pope and see what kind of stupid answer you get. That's why. You see? You'll get a stupid answer if you do not consult Yahweh. All right? You will go off to left field and think that you are somehow smart. That's why you have to ask at Abel always. And what would the Pope tell you? You know, it was brought out recently that Yisrayl Hawkins is a comforter to us. Now, the Pope is trying to be a comforter too. But you see, he's a false comforter. Okay? It's like he's telling you, you can go driving down the street, break all the traffic lights, and everything will be fine. Okay? You can break the rules, and everything will be fine. No evil can come upon you. That's the impression. That's what they're trying to say. All right? In society, they can do whatever they want. No evil will come upon you. Brethren, don't let these things just go right over your head. You are being given some ironclad information here. Rock solid. Based on truth. And you should see what the world is built on. It's probably less than sand. That's what he's saying here. Men, women, and children are being murdered, and you can just look and see what's going on and recognize that, you know, he's kissing babies and is flowery words is not changing the facts. You know, they're actually causing people to buy into their own death. Okay? buy into all the ills that you see. All right? And, we can get a great discount by not participating in that. So all these murders is going on all over the face of the earth, and tortured in prison by Catholic Church, even raping little boys until they die, and throwing them in the gutters or whatever. This is still going on. All of these evils are still going on. You know what they want? They want the evil to take place in what I call in the background. Okay? In the background. So they want the death, the suffering to take place in the background. Okay? And the thing that you should hear are the promises of future medical treatments. Okay? But they want, like abortion, for example. That is taking place in the background now. It doesn't really make the news per se unless somebody wants to get up there and do away with it. Okay? You could be walking in a city like New York City, passing all sort of buildings, and you pass a business that says women's clinic, and you think nothing of it. But in that building, several hundred or thousand deaths could be taking place every year. You see? It's operating in the background. And you're just walking by and going doing your shopping. You don't notice it. They want the killings that's going on in Chicago to operate in the background. The only thing that they want you to get excited about is when a white police officer shoots a black man. You know why? Because that can generate some more death. We should not be deceived by these things, brethren. We should see them and consider the blessings of where we are at. Okay? So here's what would the Pope say? And I'm not, and who am I to judge? And that come off and sound so as if he's so compassionate or what have you. Nobody's not asking him to judge. You're making yourself out to be someone who speaks on behalf of Yahweh, right? That's what he's trying to give the impression to the world. So if you are trying to make yourself out to be someone who speaks on behalf of Yahweh, just read what Yahweh says. That's all you got to do. Read it and just say it. That's what Yahweh says. You can't do that because that's not who he's working for. You see? And there's a section here that I'll point that out to. I hope I didn't pass it. Verse 43. Yahweh knows, but they push Yahweh aside. And when you push Yahweh aside, what is that? What is iniquity? Right. The greatest wisdom they could ever hope to find, things that would tell them what to do to solve all their problems, and they push it aside. It means nothing to them. You know why? It was taken away from them. See? The light was taken away from them, as Daniel prophesied. The books were sealed. They were sealed up in a vault. They weren't even taken out until the 1900s. I think it was 1916 or something like that when they finally started distributing them in Oklahoma. We got one when I was about 7 or 8 years old. His mother, he says here, actually read him the scriptures in the womb. And that's what we have the opportunity to do as well. We have the opportunity, brethren, to cultivate Yeshua's. That's what we have the opportunity to do. let's go up to verse 45. If you would just get in your head that you could get taught, you could teach your enemies how to be friends, how to be buddies with you, how to come and work for Yahweh, how to be a servant in Yahweh's kingdom. But your forefathers pushed this away. And guess what? What did I just read? It's a peaceful solution. And the Pope said, out of respect. Now listen to this one. This is what this is the verse that I wanted to point out. Out of respect for God. Notice who he is respecting. Okay? Out of respect for God. In using God, he's trying to make out like he's really talking about Yahweh. But notice, out of respect for God, you notice he didn't say out of respect for Yahweh. Notice that. He's not trying to respect Yahweh. That should be clear to us. It's a little bit, fuzzy to the world, but that should be crystal clear to us. He's not trying to respect Yahweh, because if you are striving to respect Yahweh, you would use his name. You would use his name. He said, out of respect for God, we shouldn't mention the name Yahweh, and we shouldn't keep his laws. This is like one of those things like evolution. Okay? To me, this is like stupid, like evolution to me. Okay? And I'm going to show you just what I mean by that. If you have your books of Yahweh, and let me read further here. It says, yes, that's what he's saying. His family showing his hands. He's finally showing his hands. Okay. In 2 Chronicles chapter 6, we find the Solomon giving a prayer. I think if you have an opportunity, please read this prayer. And it's a prayer in dedicating the house of Yahweh to Yahweh. In verse 12, he says, then Solomon stood in front of the altar of Yahweh in the presence of all the congregation of Israel and spread out his hands. I want you to take note of that too. Spread out his hands. This is what we do in the house of Yahweh. You see what spreading out your hands look like? Okay. Verse 19. Yet attend to the prayer of your servant and his supplication, O Yahweh, my Father, and listen to the cry and to the prayer your servant is praying in front of you. May your eyes be open towards this house day and night, seeing this place which you said you would place your name. May you hear the prayer which your servant prays towards this place. And may you hear the supplication of your servant and your people, Yisrayl, when they pray towards this place. Go to verse 26. When the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned. Now, do you see that? That's what Pastor is bringing out. Okay? When there is drought, it's not because you went under some barbecue or some burnt sacrifice in their backyard. Okay? That's not why. It's when you have sinned. And you know what? The Pope knows that, whenever there is turmoil, whenever there is natural disasters, people have a yearning to want to turn to a creator, right? He want to take that out of the people's mind and proactively say it is global warming or the amount of cows out there on the farm that's farting. Okay? That's the reason. Okay? Right? He don't want the people to be thinking that, Yes, it's because of these homosexuality, there's the, adultery and fornication. This is why. They don't want that kind of uprising. So they're telling you ahead of time, when you see the drought, when you see the waves coming in, all of these, it's these gases. Okay? That's another stupid one like evolution. Let's continue here. Your people have sinned against you. When they pray towards this place and confess your name, tell me how you're going to do that. By doing what he says over here. Out of respect. Don't say it out of respect for Yahweh. How are you going to do this one? Confess your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them. Go to verse 32. Now look at this one. This one is a no-brainer because he just finished talking about the people of Israel, the native born, that they can use the name, that they can cry out to their father, right? But take it a little bit further now. Look at this here. Verse 32. Concerning a foreigner who is not of your people Israel. Now, if nobody should be able to say that word, it should be the foreigner, don't you think? So, continuing here, but who comes from a far country, just making sure that you understand this is a foreigner now. He comes from a far country for the sake of your great name and your mighty hand. How are you going to hear about Yahweh? You're going to hear about what he did, but the name is going to be connected there. Your name is the bus or the car that carries your reputation. You understand that? Your name carries your reputation. Okay? And your outstretched arm when they come and pray in this house. Then hear from heaven your dwelling place and do whatever, do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the people of the earth, this year is going to be fulfilled. In these last days, this is going to be fulfilled. Okay? Because they chose to take it out. They were not honorable to do this. It says here, and do whatever the foreigner asks you to ask you, so all the peoples of the earth may know your name and reverence you. Okay? All the people of the earth. Okay? You, just as your own people do. Just as your own people do. They're not calling themselves Yahweh. They're not. Okay? They don't do it. It's being done here. Don't go nowhere else. Here. Okay? And that they may know that this house I have built is called with your name. That's what we are called. We are called with Yahweh's name. Don't forget it. You carry the name. Let your actions comply with that. Okay? Let's see if I run out of time. No, I got more time. Okay, so that should put that one to bed. You know? Don't let anybody tell you anything. You know, in New York, we had a guy who, you know, I asked him to pray for a speech class, and he came up, and he praying, and the man go say, Yahuwah. I said, hold on, what is this? I mean, you know, you think that you can't get infected? Think again. Okay, think again. All right? There's a lot of crap going out on YouTube. His name is Yahuwah, Yahweh, Yahuwah. All right? And you have people sucking it up. They can't tell you anything. The only person who can tell you anything is the person who was prophesied to be sent in these last days. Don't try to, like you have some bigger intelligence than that. You cannot. Okay, the man already he's telling you through this message here, the prophecies that were fulfilled, the prophecies that was fulfilled. You cannot be right and be outside of the prophecies, brethren. Don't work. It don't work. Verse 48. Verse 48. It says here. I had to correct that brother in public because he said those things in public. And say, listen, this is not the house of Yahuwah. Okay, this is the house of Yahweh. And when you hear, you're going to reverence Yahweh or don't be here. Okay? You could have accomplished a lot if you'd just, and he's talking to the Pope here, okay? If you just taught these people righteousness. And where do we find that with Scripture? We find that in Jeremiah 23, where it says, but if they had stood in my counsel and had caused my people to hear my words, the law and the prophets, and that's what you'll hear in the house of Yahweh. It's like a broken record. The laws and the prophets. The laws and the prophets. By the time we're done, we should be singing it. Okay? Then they would have turned them from their evil way and from the evil of their doing. Okay? If they had just done that, we wouldn't have all this craziness. Verse 49. Pope Francis came here and let us come here and let us teach you. Let us teach you righteousness and teach you how it will solve these problems, and you'll have righteous answers for the people. You won't say who am I to judge? Here you have accomplished this all over the world. You have showing your face in all over the world, and this didn't come from Dick Cheney. What the Pope is actually doing is fulfilling prophecy of coming out of the bottomless pit. Okay, coming out of the, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but when you think about that, coming out of the bottomless pit, what does a gay person usually say when they make themselves known? They're coming out of where? The closet, right? Okay, the closet usually, if you lock the closet, it's dark in there. All right? And you're at the bottom of it. Right? Satan over here, the Pope here is coming out of the bottomless pit. Okay? And it's a whole process here coming out of that bottomless pit, revealing to the world his true colors. You see? That's what we see taking place here and now. Continuing in verse 51. This is speaking now. He mentioned Malachi 3 verse 12, and the Kiefer Reynolds that was here was touching on this earlier. It says, Malachi 3 verse 12 says, because of you, Zion will be plowed like a field. Again, pointing out a prophecy here. Okay? Pointing out a prophecy here. And also showing the other prophecies that have yet to be fulfilled, brethren. You can bank on it. Okay? You can be assured that they're going to be fulfilled. And as the Khan, he said it so well. It might seem like it's taking a long time in coming. But when it does come, boy, we're going to feel like, man, whoa, time run out already? I still didn't get to do this. I still didn't do that. So, let it resonate with you, brethren, and make sure that we are doing everything we can to overcome, okay, and to fulfill and help the witness do the work that has been assigned to him to do. Because it's not just overcoming, that's one thing, very important thing, okay, but it's also fulfilling all of what we have to fulfill. Let's go ahead and read the last two sentences in verse 63. It says, get your heart right with Yahweh. Get your heart right with Yahweh. Yes, and He will use you. He's going to use you. He prophesied that He would if you'll just get your hearts right with Him. That's what we have the opportunity to do in these last days. We have a ringside seat, brethren, to the unfolding of the prophecies. That's what we have. We have a ringside seat. Some is in the bleachers. But and Yahweh says, Yahweh give us permission. He says, watch. He tell us to watch. Okay? And see these things fulfilled, brethren. May Yahweh bless your understanding.